As we continue working on the Visual Principles Part 1 assignment, the next step will be to take the sketches that we've created and actually translate them into Adobe Illustrator. So here I have Adobe Illustrator open, and I have the template file open as well. This was provided to you through the Learning Management System. And you'll see that it opens with multiple artboards or pages, and then there's a section for the point compositions, the line compositions, and the plane compositions. So this is where you will translate all of your sketches into the computer, which we need for the final assignment. The first thing you want to do when you open this assignment, template file, or any other really, is to resave the file. We want to create a duplicate file with our name on it. That way we don't accidentally override the file and we can keep track of our work. So you can do that by going up to File, Save As. Again, this is going to create a duplicate file. And then I'm going to go to the beginning of the name of the file and add my first initial and then my last name and an underscore. You can really call this whatever you want, but I think that's a good habit to get into to have nice file management. And you'll see that what it's going to do is create a duplicate of that file. I'm going to go ahead and save this on the desktop, which is where I have the original file, but you could also navigate to a different portion of the computer to save it wherever you like. This should say Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Another menu will pop up with the options. I'm going to go ahead and keep these at default. So I'm going to click OK. And you'll notice up here now the file has a different name. This means that if we downloaded the template file again from the Learning Management System, for some reason we needed to start over, you could do that without overwriting this file. But really, you might not even need to do that now. You could always go back to the original file that you downloaded and it would look exactly like this. Following the rules on this project are really important, as we've talked about already. But also keeping the file clean and exactly how the template is provided to you is also really important. So that's why having these multiple versions might be helpful to you. Let's talk a little bit about how this file is set up and how to work within it, as well as some Illustrator basics as well. The first thing I want to talk about are workspaces. Workspaces are different settings that you can select that change how the interface of Adobe Illustrator looks. You can do that up here through Window, Workspace, and then there's some different ones that you can select. One thing that you'll notice is as I select a different one, my computer screen and where the windows live changes. So if you want to follow along with me using the exact workspace I'm using, I recommend going to Workspace and selecting Essentials Classic. You may also want to come up here and select Reset Essentials Classic, just to be safe. This will make sure that my screen looks exactly like your screen, and that'll help you follow along. Another thing to know about is we're going to want to zoom in and out of this file as well as move around this file. So there's a magnifying glass tool over here, and you'll see a little plus in the middle. And wherever I click, it will zoom in that area, more or less. If I hold down Option, it'll turn to a minus symbol and allow me to zoom out. You can also do some funny things with this tool. You can click and hold and it will zoom in that area. So depending on which one you have on. But then you can also click and drag. So I'm holding the mouse button down and I'm clicking and dragging, and it will allow me to zoom in and out in this function as well. You can also do that through the View menu. There's a zoom in and zoom out. There's also shortcuts for this, Command plus and Command minus. So that's something I'll be using a lot. If you see me zooming in and out without using the magnifying glass tool, I'm doing that using those shortcuts. Another tool I'll use often is this hand tool. When you click on it, you can actually click and drag and move around the file. So here I can move between these different compositions. But another great shortcut to know is if you're on a different tool, so I'll go back to the magnifying glass and I hold down spacebar. You'll notice when you're holding down spacebar, that hand tool appears. And that also will allow me to move around the file without changing tools. So another function that you'll see me use often that I wanted to make sure I explained. Another tool we should talk about is this selection tool. This allows us to select things within the file. You can also click and drag to select more than one thing at once. One thing you might notice is that you're not able to select the typography in this file. It's because to try to help you keep everything where it is, all of the type in this file is locked. If for some reason you wanted to unlock that, you could come to Object, Unlock All, although I don't recommend doing this unless you're in a certain situation where you really needed to do this. But if you unlock everything, you'll see that now all of the typography is movable. That might allow you to mess up the file a little bit, so please be careful. But if you do ever do anything in this file like I just did now that you didn't want to do, you can always come up here to Edit and do Undo. that'll take whatever action you just did and undo it. This is really a useful tool in all of the software, and that shortcut is Command Z. I'm also going to do this again because I want to relock everything in the file. It's going to be much easier to work in this file if everything is locked, and I can only move the actual composition boundaries that I need. That's a little bit of how this file is set up, a little bit of how to work through Adobe Illustrator. So now we want to talk about translating these sketches. One thing to know is that you're going to be translating 2 of each term and each actual shape. So here we're going to put 2 symmetries that are both point, 2 asymmetry that are point, so on and so forth. And if we scroll across, you'll see all of the places where those compositions will go. And those are really repeated down below for each of the other shapes. So here's all of our line compositions. Here's all of our plane compositions. You can select the sketches that you want to translate, but focus on how effectively you're communicating. Take into consideration also your peers' feedback and potentially your instructor's feedback. But we understand that they might change a little bit as you're translating them into Illustrator, and that's okay. Just make sure that you keep them as close to the sketch as you can, but really make sure that as you're changing them, you're still communicating the terms effectively. We want to make sure that we're doing the best job we can to do this visual communication, because that's really the core of this assignment. But once you select the sketches that you want to translate, we'll need to create shapes in Illustrator that correspond with the shapes that you've drawn. That's going to bring us to this menu. Here we have the different shapes that we can create. So we're going to focus on the rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, and the polygon tool. And you may only see one over here. Here I only see the ellipse tool, but if I click and hold, the menu will pop out and I can select the other ones that I might want to work with. You can also click and hold and select this little arrow on the far right if you'd like, and it will actually pop out that entire menu. So now I have an additional menu where I can click between the different tools, and that can be another way to work within the file. But since we're on the point section, we want to be making perfect circles. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that ellipse tool. Another thing we need to work on is to make sure that the shapes are solid black or white, right? We can only work with solid black shapes or solid white shapes. So down here is where we can see the color of the shapes that we're going to create. And right now you'll notice that this larger one on top, that's the fill. And the fill right now is set to none, but the stroke is set to black. This is how it will default, but I actually want the fill to be black and the stroke to be none. So now that this is selected on top, see how this is on top? I'm going to click black right here. Also, Illustrator is getting smart here and it knows I'm working with color, so it's going to pop up this color menu. So sometimes that'll happen. I'm going to ignore that for now, but you could also select black here, or potentially white if you're trying to do a white shape, or none if for some reason you want to go back to none. But I'm going to go ahead and create a black shape, so I'm going to click black. And now I want to click on the stroke. I want to click on this stroke, see how this is on top now, and I'm going to click none. So now I'm going to be creating a solid black shape with no stroke, which is what I want. So now I can come over here and I can click and drag and start creating ellipses. So as you click and drag, you can make them different shapes. Remember, we're only allowed to work with perfect circles. But it can be a little bit frustrating to create a perfect circle by just clicking and dragging. So another functionality we really want to know about is the shift key. If we hold the shift key while we're creating an ellipse, it will only allow it to create a perfect shape. So I'm going to select these and delete them. So I'm just pressing the delete key. And I'm going to come back to the ellipse tool and I'm going to hold down shift. You'll immediately see that now I'm only able to create perfect circles. I can create them any size I want, but all of them are going to be a perfect circle, which is what we want for the point section. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag and select all of these using the selection tool and press delete to delete them all at once. So that's how we're going to work with the point section. You're going to use this ellipse tool to create those perfect circles. Now I'm going to scroll down to the next section, which is line. Line works a little bit differently. For lines, we're actually going to use this line tool. And that's the only one we need. If you click and hold, you'll see that there are other tools under here, like with the shape menu, but I only want straight lines. So that's all I'm going to focus on here. Now when I create lines, I'm going to click and drag, and you'll notice that it'll allow me to create lines of different length and at different angles. If I hold down shift on this one, it's only going to allow me to create a line at certain angles. So that could be useful in certain situations. But one thing you're going to notice right away is that I'm creating lines, but I don't really see anything. That's because the line tool works a little bit differently. The line tool actually relies on stroke and not fill. So here what I need to do is actually make sure that the stroke is on top, and I'm going to select black, and you'll see that now I can see those lines. And now when I draw lines, you're going to be able to see them as you draw them. So it's one difference between the shape tools that we'll be using for point and plane and the line section. Another thing you might be wondering is, but what if I want different thicknesses of lines? Well, that's up here, the stroke section. So if I have a line selected and I move this up and down, I'm able to actually change the thickness of the stroke. So that's going to be really useful on this, but be careful. You don't want to go too large or else you'll actually unintentionally be creating rectangles, which is a violation of one of the rules. You can also select here and enter a value. So you can actually enter a value if that's something that you want to do, but that's going to be the way that you actually change the thickness of these strokes. So I can come in here and select the direct selection tool. I can select a different one and change the thickness. I can select two at once and change their thickness together. So it's really up to you how you want to handle that, but that's the different ways that you can change the thickness of these lines. Another interesting thing is that whatever you have it on, the next time I create a line, it will actually create a line of that thickness. So that's another interesting thing that you can play with, is actually changing this before you make a line. But none of these things are right or wrong. It's just different ways that you can work with the line tool to create the different lines that you want for your compositions. I'm gonna go ahead and select all of this and delete it and move down to the last shape, which is the planes. So the planes, we already know how to make one of them. It's those perfect circles, which we create with the ellipse tool. But we want solid shapes, so I'm gonna go ahead and go back to having a solid fill that's black and then no line. Since I have the fill right now as none and I have black for the stroke, I can actually click this little arrow, the swap fill and stroke. That's going to be a really quick way to do it in this case, and we'll go back to what we want. So another little tip there for you. So if I hold down shift with the ellipse tool, I'm going to create those perfect circles. Then if I go to the rectangle tool and I hold down shift, I'll create perfect squares. So hopefully that makes sense. Very similar to the way that the point tool works. But then if I come up here to the polygon tool, you'll notice that even holding shift, it will default to creating a six-sided shape. That's not quite what we want. So if I actually hold option and just click once anywhere on the screen, it'll bring up the polygon menu. And that'll allow me to tell it that I want a three-sided shape. So you're gonna enter 3 there, or you can toggle this up and down. Click OK, and now it's gonna create triangles for us. So if I hold down shift, it'll always create triangles. The good news is it'll mostly want to create equilateral triangles for you. In this case, holding down shift will just make it create a triangle where the bottom is flat. It won't be rotated. So that's a little bit of the difference on this one. But once you do that once, you tell it you want three-sided shapes, you won't have to do that again. But if you do for some reason, again, just hold down option and click anywhere and you can change the number of sides. So that gets us the different shapes that we need. We have the perfect circles, the perfect squares, and the perfect triangles. But what about some other functionality that we might need as we're working in this file? Let's talk about some other tools that can be useful. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these shapes and create some squares of different sizes. So I'm going to create one, and then another one, and then maybe one that's a little bit smaller than the other two. You know what? I actually want this one to be even smaller, so I'm going to use the selection tool to select it. And you'll notice that I get these options. This is another useful thing that you'll want to know. If I hold down shift when the little arrow looks like this, it's going to change the size. If I don't hold down shift, it'll make it any shape I want, but if I hold down shift, it'll only do a square. So I want that one to be a little bit smaller. Maybe I want this one to be a little bit smaller too. So again, I'm holding down shift. You want to be careful because there's also the rotation. If the arrow looks like this, it'll actually allow you to rotate the square, which can be useful. Maybe that's something you want to do. But what you really want to be careful of is these in the inside. Messing with these will actually round the corners, which is something we don't really want. So just be weary of that. But again, you can rotate or change scale by coming around these different nodes around the edges of the shape. But what I want to do here is I want to layer some shapes together. I actually want all of these to be layered together, and I even want this one to be white. So I'm going to go ahead and select this square, and I'm going to click here. Then I'm going to come up here and click white. My color menu is still open. If for some reason for you it isn't, it's up here at the top. Click white. I can't see it anymore, but now I have a white shape. I'm gonna go ahead and put this on top of this square, and then I'm gonna go ahead and put this one on top of both of them. Now this is layered in the right way, but sometimes it might look like this. You might not be able to see that one behind it. You know it's there, but you can't quite get at it. Well, this is where layering becomes important in Illustrator. We want to layer these shapes just right. So what I'm going to actually do is come up here to the Object and the Arrange menu to change the way these shapes layer within the file. So I think the best way to do this will be to actually select the white shape, and then I'm going to hold down Shift to select this larger black shape as well. When you hold down Shift, you can select multiple things at one time. And I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back in this situation. That way now I have them layered back the way it was. I have them layered in the way that I want them. But maybe my goal here is to have them all be layered on top of each other and perfectly centered. So I'm going to select all of them using Shift again. So I'm holding down the Shift key. I've selected all three. Again, you could also do this by clicking and dragging. Then I'm going to go to Object and play with the Align function. So these are align functions that will align the shapes that you have selected. So here I'm going to do Horizontal Align Center, and then I'm going to go back and do Vertical Align Center. So now I kind of have what I was looking for, where all those shapes are perfectly layered on top of each other. And maybe that's what I wanted for this composition. So that's going to help me make sure I have that where I want it. And that's a good way to use the align functions and the arrange functions to keep things where they are. You can also play with different alignment options. So if I come up here to Object, Align, maybe I do Horizontal Align Right. You'll notice that they're all going to align on the right side. So you can play with these. Sometimes they'll be helpful to get things exactly where you want them. And it's just a useful tool in Illustrator to help you make sure that you're aligning things, especially if you're doing things that you want to be concentric or completely centered. Now let's talk about another concept. This is the concept of clipping masks or masking, which is something we might need to do in the file. Probably all of you will have at least one composition that will involve this. If you remember from the rules, shapes cannot exceed or go outside of the actual bounding box or the edge of the composition. So these rectangles that are created in the file for you. But sometimes you want something to appear that it's moving past that. The best way to do that will be through masking. So I'm going to zoom in on this asymmetry composition, and I'm going to create a very large circle. So this defaulted back, I'm going to use that flip so I have the solid fill in black. And I'm going to hold down Shift, create a big circle. And maybe my goal is for this circle to come off of these two edges. But I can't do it like this, right? This violates the rule. Well, that's where masking comes in. I'm going to create a couple other shapes that maybe don't bleed. Maybe some small ones. And maybe I have one bigger one that bleeds down here at the bottom. Maybe this is my goal. This is the kind of composition that I want to translate for asymmetry. Maybe let's throw in a square as well, just so we have one, right? Since we can play with different planes. Maybe a triangle too. All right. So here I more or less have my composition. This is what I wanted. It looks like my sketch. Now I need to work on getting everything to fit within the edges of this composition. So this is a little bit tricky. There's a couple steps here that we need to follow. The first one is I need to select all of the shapes in the composition. So I have the triangle selected. I'm going to hold down Shift and select the circle, the square, all the other circles. So now I have all of those selected and I just have the shape selected, nothing else. I'm going to come up here to Object and I'm going to group them together. This is another handy shortcut to know, Command G, because what's going to happen now is now I can move these as one thing. The computer now reads them as a grouping that I can move together. And that's step one for masking, is grouping all of the objects that are going to be within the clipping mask. The next step is I actually need two frames. I will need two of these to pull this off. So I'm going to actually select the frame, and then I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to copy the frame. So this will allow me to have a copy, but I need to paste it to get that second one. So now I'm going to unselect just to be sure, and I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to do Paste. So now I have another one, but it didn't quite go where I wanted it to, right? So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to do a Paste in Place. That's going to paste it directly on top, which is what I wanted. Now the other important part is the frame itself needs to be on top of all of the shapes. So I'm going to select that frame, and I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, Bring to Front, just to make sure that I know that frame is on top. So now I have that frame, and then I have the shapes that are all grouped together. So now I'm going to select the frame on top, and I'm going to hold down Shift and select those shapes. And I'm going to go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make. So that's Command 7. And you'll see that it did exactly what we wanted. All of the shapes that were outside of that frame are now clipped with inside. But one thing to notice is why we made 2 frames is if I move this, the frame is gone. The frame is now an invisible square that's actually containing all of those shapes. So I'm going to come up here and do an undo so I get it back where it is. But that's why you need 2, because we still want the actual frame on the outside to be there, because that's one of the rules that we have to have that frame. Another more advanced thing that I'll teach you that could be useful is maybe I didn't quite get things where I wanted it. Maybe I don't really like where this circle is. You can actually click on the mask, the clipping mask with the shapes, and I can double click, and then I can click one more time. So you'll see things are changing up here. Now I'm inside of the clipping mask. And now when I click inside, I actually can move these shapes within the clipping mask itself. So that can be useful if you want to move things just a little bit. And then if I double click over here away from everything else, it'll go back to how it was. Another thing you can do is you can actually select the mask, go to Object, Clipping Mask, and do a release. A release will actually undo that, and it will go back to having the shapes coming outside of the frame like we had it. But one thing that can be confusing about this is that now that frame that we were using for the mask is actually invisible. It's not going to go back to having a stroke. We talked about that now it's an invisible square and it's going to stay that way. So it sometimes can be hard to keep track of, but we could always do the whole thing again. I can come in here and I can select the frame. I deleted that invisible one. Select the frame, go to Edit, Copy. And this time I'm going to do another step which will expedite this a little bit. I'm actually going to do a paste in front. Last time we did a paste in place, but if I do a paste in front, it's actually going to paste it in place, but it's also going to paste it on top, which can sometimes remove that arrange part that we were doing. We can avoid this step. So now I'm going to select the shapes that are grouped. And one more time, I'm going to go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make. Uh-oh, what happened? Something's wrong here. When this happens, this means that somehow that frame was not on top. It's trying to mask the frame into the shapes rather than the shapes into the frame. If this happens, it means that things weren't layered in the right way. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Command Z to undo. And I'm going to come in here and select that frame. And I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, Bring to Front. Then I'm going to select the shapes again. Go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make. And that's more what we wanted. So that's why the first time I didn't do the paste in front. Sometimes doing the paste in place and then going through the extra step of the Arrange, Bring to Front can be worth your while. But sometimes it's useful for me to show you when things go wrong. So if that goes wrong, that's what's happening. You don't have things layered in the right way, but we're back to how we wanted this to look. So that's a little bit of how masking works, how we use clipping masks in Illustrator. And again, it's a little bit tricky, but I think all of you will probably have at least one composition, if not multiple compositions, where you'll need to explore clipping masks to create compositions that look like this, where things are going out of the edge of the compositional frame. So let's pretend now that we have this entire file finished. Obviously I don't. I only have a couple here. I did 2. But maybe you've completed everything and you've double checked it and you like the way it looks and you want to go ahead and export this file. Well, first I would definitely save the file. You should be saving as you go along, but saving this will make sure that you have all of your work and you have all of your work as an Illustrator file. The next step is I want to save as, but this time I'm going to save it as a PDF. So I'm going to go to Save As. I'm going to go ahead and keep the name the same since it'll be a different file type. It won't matter if they have the same name. I'm going to save it on the desktop just to keep things where I had them. I'm going to come down here though, and I'm going to change this to PDF. We're going to leave all of this to default. This you really can't change, but that's good because we want to use artboards. And then I want to keep all checked. That's going to make sure that it exports every single artboard in this file, which will ultimately become separate pages in that PDF. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And then we get this dialog box, which will allow you to change the PDF itself. I don't want to change any of this though. I'll scroll through things just so you can see what it looks like to make sure that yours looks like mine. But you really just want the default settings here. On future assignments, if we change these settings, we'll always let you know. And these can be useful in other situations as you progress in your graphic design career. But generally, we're going to want to use the default here. And I'm just going to click Save PDF. Now in the background, it's actually going to create a separate file that we're going to open that will have all of our compositions in it and that we can use to add our sketches and ultimately upload to the assignment section to be graded. So I'm going to navigate down to my desktop, and there's that file. Now, obviously mine's going to be blank. There's going to be a lot of blank things within this file, but it opens within Adobe Acrobat. I can zoom out on this so I can see more of it. And you'll notice here's all the different pages. And if I go to the very bottom or near the bottom, we're going to see the compositions that I created. But if this whole file was filled out, all of this would have all of your compositions in it, and they would all be in the correct order because the artboards are created in the correct order. So this is how you export this file to get it ready to upload. The only other thing you'll need to do on this assignment and sometimes other assignments is actually add your sketches to the file. I know you already submitted your sketches to be reviewed by your peers, but they also need to be submitted to be graded. There are quite a few different ways to add sketches to this file for the final grading, and I do go over that in another video that you can watch because it helps with the different techniques depending on how you created those sketches, but it also helps understand ways to do it for other assignments in this class. So hopefully that really helps you understand the software component of this assignment and gives you some assistance to really get this completed. As always, you can email your instructor if you have more questions, and best of luck to you on this project.